everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is my ultimate Women's Prize long list. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books. And today's video is actually about books that I have read, and some of these probably not books that I've actually talked about that much on the channel, although some of them will be. So I saw this video on Jennifer's channel, Jennifer Loves Books, and I would urge you to go and check out her Ultimate Women's Prize long list as well. This came from an idea that I think Charlotte Malloy started last year of her Ultimate Booker Prize long list. This is basically from all of the Women's Prize books that I have read, which I do have a video of from last year, I believe. I will link that one in the description down below if you want to see what I was choosing from, aside from the entire long list of last year, which I read for the very first time. I would say I've not read a huge amount of books from the previous Women's Prize long lists, but I did love this idea, and I have read enough to populate a 16 book long list, because a lot of the books I've read from the Women's Prize for Fiction, even though I read most of them before even thinking about following the Women's Prize, have just been favourite books. So thanks to Jennifer for starting this one. I really wanted to talk about my favourite 16 that we've seen on the Women's Prize list, and I am including all of the books from the inception of the Women's Prize back in the 90s, and that includes like any sponsorship names it's had in the past before it was just called outright the Women's Prize. So I'm going to go, like Jennifer, from the oldest to the most recent, and only two of my favourites, which I think you can probably guess, have been winners in the past. 6 of my choices were longlisted and 8 were shortlisted, and as I've said, most of these were actually read before I was interested in the Women's Prize, and I didn't really know that these had been longlisted, shortlisted or won the Women's Prize until I looked into all the past long lists last year when planning the Women's Prize Plodalong. If you aren't familiar with the Women's Prize Plodalong, it's an unofficial read-along, very casually, of the Women's Prize that I'm hosting along with Gemma from Gemma Books and Charlie from Charlie Book Reads, and we're going to be live on BookTube roughly every 10 days during Women's Prize season on one or other of our channels. Watch out on our community tabs for when the next show is, but we're hoping to bring you lots of booktuber guests talking about their favourite Women's Prize books. We've had the long list announced for fiction this week, so there's been a lot of excitement, but as that excitement calms down, I thought I would talk about my past favourites. If you would like to guess in the comments which of these would make my ultimate shortlist and are my top favourites on this list, please do so in the comments. It would be very interesting to see, but I think a lot of you will know when we get to them. So let's start back in 1997. This one's made it onto my ultimate long list because I remember this as the first adult book that I read, and I do remember really loving it. I remember it with great fondness, and that was Anita and Me by Meera Syal. Meera Syal is better known as a comedian, but this book is not especially funny. It's a sort of a coming of age story of friendship between the me of the title and Anita, who is a girl that she meets who lives near to her, and they strike up a friendship. I really enjoyed this story, and it's one that I would definitely look to reread one day because it was a long time ago now that I read it. So coming on to the following year, 1998, one of my other favourites that I remember enough to know that I loved it, but don't remember enough to prevent me from definitely needing to reread this, is The Weight of Water by Anita Shreve. This one, I am very hazy on the details, but I do remember the involvement of water quite heavily in this book. There's a particular scene in it that I can't describe without spoilers that has lasted a very long time in my memory, and yeah, unfortunately, I don't have an awful lot else to tell about that book, but it would definitely make my ultimate long list. Next up, we go forward to 1999 and The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. This is one that I've actually read in the past year. It was my second Barbara Kingsolver, and after a slow start, I must say, absolutely loved this. It was completely a 5-star book. I think Kingsolver has a talent for writing in different voices, and this one follows 4 different girls in the same family, and all of their narrative styles are so very distinct from each other. And I really enjoyed this account of these 4 girls' lives as part of a missionary family in the then Belgian Congo and what happened to them afterwards. Really great read, I highly recommend it. The next book on my ultimate long list would be from 2003, and that is The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. This one is a really brutal book. It's told from the perspective of a girl who is killed, I think probably in the first chapter, and it's told as if she is watching her family in the days and weeks and months after her death and disappearance, as though she is looking down on her family from heaven. Definitely one that could be a very difficult read depending on your mood, but I love this book and it has absolutely stayed with me all these years since I read it. So The Lovely Bones only made the long list in 2003, but making the short list is one of my other inclusions, which is The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. I've actually not yet read Donna Tartt's most recent book, The Goldfinch, and I feel like she must be due for another book sometime soon as well. The Little Friend, for me, is another great read that I have retained as like being a book I really, really enjoyed when I read it. But again, read it such a long time ago now that there is like one standout scene in my memory, again, which would contain spoilers. So this tends to be the Donna Tartt novel that most people have not tried, but if you haven't tried it, I would say it's well worth it for Donna Tartt's brilliant writing, and I did enjoy this story, even though it was a very different tale from the one we got in The Secret History. So moving forward to 2004, I have another long-listed book, The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. Looking back on it, this is such a weird concept for a book, and it was one at the time that my mum told me to read, and I was like, what are you on about? The Time Traveller's Wife? That sounds terrible. But I loved it. I thought that this was a brilliant book about a man who is kind of an involuntary time traveller and a girl who he meets while time travelling, who, as you can imagine from the title, somehow becomes his wife. Yeah, this is a difficult book to wrap your head around. My next book jumps us forward 9 years for a shortlisted book. I've picked this one over another inclusion by this author because this is my favourite of the 2 that I've read, and that is Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. This is famously the second book in the Wolf Hall series, which follows Thomas Cromwell, advisor to Henry VIII. I am really, really looking forward now to reading The Mirror and the Light, which I've never got to yet. The first time I picked up Wolf Hall, I actually put it to one side to read another time because I just couldn't get my head round the style of it. By the time I did read it again and loved it, when I got to the sequel, Bring Up the Bodies, was already into the narrative style and the kind of headspace of the Tudor court, and I absolutely loved this one. I think it's really brilliantly crafted and brings to life the Tudor story of Anne Boleyn that we all think we know so well, but from a completely different perspective. Very happy to include the one and only Hilary Mantel on this list. My next one is from the same year, and it was also shortlisted, and that is Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. I absolutely love this book about Ursula, who is living her life over and over again, basically. She is born just before the First World War, and throughout her lives she has various deaths, and it's difficult to explain this one without making it sound really weird, but it is an absolute tour de force by Kate Atkinson, and one that I remember very, very fondly. But I also remember the part of this that is set in the Second World War. I remember being on the absolute edge of my seat. I don't think I've ever been in such terror for a character ever anywhere else. Absolutely, this had to be on this ultimate long list. Next up, from 2015, is a long-listed book, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. If this doesn't seem like the sort of book that usually gets put on the Women's Prize long list, it doesn't seem like that to me either, but I'm very excited that it is, because this is one of my favourite sort of apocalyptic books, and I'm glad I read it before the pandemic, because it's really very close to home of the pandemic that we've had in a scary way. So I really enjoyed all of the elements of Station 11. Emily St. John Mandel is definitely an author that I want to read again on this basis. Next up, another perhaps surprising entry on the long list from 2016 was A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. And I only read this one last year as well. It narrowly missed out on my top 10 books of the year to another Becky Chambers book, but I think that this is an excellent, excellent introduction to this author. I loved the elements of found family in this, and the creation of a world of all different species of characters. I just thought Chambers' writing was really, really interesting, and this is truly really great sci-fi. My next pick was from 2019, and that's The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, which was shortlisted. This is a retelling of Achilles' story, really, but it's not told as Achilles' story. It's told from the points of view of the women in Achilles' camp in the Trojan War. And I read this before any other retellings of the Trojan War. In fact, I read it before I had read the Odyssey, before I had read the Iliad. Reading this made me want to read the Iliad and find out where this all came from, because it is just such a brilliant read. I think Pat Barker is a great writer. I really believed in all of these characters. It was just a really moving and powerful story told from a really interesting perspective. Next up, we have the first winner that I absolutely love of the Women's Prize, which is none other than the 2020 winner, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I had loved Maggie O'Farrell's writing before. Her debut novel has long been a favourite of mine, and this, for me, when I finally got around to it, the year before last, I think, was just absolutely fantastic. I haven't always been a huge reader of historical fiction, and I think that this kind of is historical fiction, but I love the way this combined Shakespeare's life and his family, but just told this in such a different perspective with so much emotion. And I genuinely felt with this book that it was not like the normal experience of reading a book. It felt to me like an immersive experience. I really, really loved this, and it was one of my absolute top books of the year that I read it, so it definitely makes my long list for the Women's Prize. The next year I'm going to is 2022, and I read nearly all of the shortlist that year, and I also read one book from the long list, and that's where I'm going to start with an absolute favourite of that year, Careless by Kirsty Capes. This was long-listed, and I still maintain that it was robbed off the shortlist. Such a great debut novel from Kirsty Capes about Bess, who is 15 and finds out she's pregnant on the very first page. And this is again another book about friendship and about growing up, and also this one really showed me a lot as well about the foster care system in Britain. This was also set in a time frame of the early 2000s, I think, late 90s perhaps, and was therefore at the same time that Bess was this age is when I was that age, so I loved that element of it as well. And the audiobook of this is also absolutely fantastic. Next up from the same year, one of the shortlisted books, Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. At times I found the narrator of this, Martha, absolutely infuriating, but that didn't prevent my enjoyment of what I think is an absolutely brilliant book about a woman struggling with her mental health and with a diagnosis that she has received. And I just really, really loved in this one in particular the portrait of Martha's family. The humour in this was just absolutely spot on, and I just thought there were some absolutely hilarious moments as it dealt with some very serious topics along the way. So absolutely fantastic read. The final book I'm going to mention from 2022 is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. It's not often you find me on this channel recommending a book that is over 600 pages long, but this is the perfect example of a book over 600 pages where not a single detail goes to waste. There is no wasted words in this. It is absolutely perfect at the size it is, and it's a sweeping epic, which is not the type of book that I thought I liked before reading Great Circle. But it follows Marion Graves, and it also follows an actress in the present day who is about to play Marion Graves in a film of her life. And Marion Graves is attempting to fly from pole to pole, circumnavigating the globe, and is absolutely obsessed with this ambition. I couldn't recommend this one enough, and it was one of my absolute favourites in 2022. I really hoped that this would win the prize, and I was sadly disappointed that it did not. So we've reached my final book. It is of course a book from 2023, last year's winner. You'll know that I'm going to pick this because it sits on my shelf all the time. It was my top favourite #1 book of 2023, and I read it for last year's long list, and that was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This has just become a favourite book of all time. I don't need to talk about it more here, but very briefly, it is a retelling of Dickens' David Copperfield, but set in the Appalachian Mountains and following Demon, or Damon, as he grows up against the backdrop of the opioid crisis in America. As I said with Barbara Kingsolver in her first inclusion in this list, I just think that the narrative voice of this is absolutely perfect, and I don't know how Kingsolver does it, but this is just a work of genius and I loved it. So I think if you've been watching this video, you will probably be able to guess which 6 I would pick for my shortlist, which are my 6 absolute favourites, and they would of course be Demon from last year, Great Circle, Sorrow and Bliss, and Careless from the year before would all make it into my own personal shortlist, possibly because a lot of the others are a long time ago, but maybe just because they are absolutely awesome books. I would also choose Hamnet as one of my absolute favourites from the Women's Prize of all time. And my final pick, if I had to pick a shortlist of 6, and possibly even competing with Demon Copperhead to be a winner, would be Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. I absolutely adore this book, and I think it is absolutely unique, and I absolutely love what Kate Atkinson is doing here. So if I had to pick 6 only, it would be these 6 from very recent years, mostly, with the oldest being Life After Life from 2013. And yeah, that was my ultimate Women's Prize long list and my favourite books that I have ever read from the Women's Prize. Do let me know in the comments, what have you enjoyed reading from the Women's Prize over the years? Are there any previous winners or shortlisted or long-listed authors you would recommend that I check out on the basis of my own long list? If you want to know which other books I've read from the Women's Prize and what I thought of them, that's all in a previous video which I will leave for you to check out. If you have enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I would love to hear from you in the comments. If you don't have anything to say today, please leave me an emoji related to one of my top 6. So that's all from me today. I hope very much to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.